But just to give a bit of context, Dan is a survivor, a veteran survivor, battle-scarred, hands filled with whatever marketers have instead of calluses, cake tin champagne, that kind of thing. And somebody who's helped a whole series of business-to-business brands to kind of cross this chasm from talking about feeds and speeds and features and capturing the wider opportunity from brand. And at CC Group, of course, you lead our marketing services stream, working with our clients who are kind of expanding their work, particularly I know around kind of building awareness, about lead generation, about supporting a wide range of often content-driven campaigns.
Yes.
And what I want to do is kind of outline, like, very quickly, the reason why we think there's an analyst relations hook into this conversation, and just talk about some of the conversations that we've been having that have led to this conversation, and then that will bridge smoothly, I hope, over to the conversation where we're going to be exploring this research that you've been doing with with opinion leaders and buyers in the tech market.
Yeah.
So let me just kind of set out this scene a little bit, and the conversation that we've really been having, I mean, not only here at CC Group, but maybe across the whole market for many years, has been about the way that B2B tech firms often focus themselves on functional aspects of their solution. But actually, when we look at the way that people are comparing solutions, often that is really not the case. And surprisingly, although you might think of industry analysts as being, people who are highly technical, actually what we found is that that's not always the case. There are a couple of data points that kind of triggered this conversation. One was this poll, where we were asking people about the information that industry analysts use, and it was both industry analysts and analyst relations people who took part in this poll last year. But what we found was that even though analysts are thought to mostly be using functional information, a large number of them are using non-functional information. And then a bigger surprise, when we did an analysis of 272 analyst briefings that have been facilitated by my team here at CC Group, we went through quite a detailed analysis of these conversations, go straight into this Q&A because the questions that people have straight off are really intriguing. And then what I'm going to do after we've set out that stall and responded to the first thoughts from the participants is then to go more into your research around a brand, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, sounds great. I suspect that the majority of those questions in the Q&A queue right now are about the interference. I think we got a little bit of cross talking for bits there, Duncan, but I am alone in a room, and so it'll just be my whispering on.
We'll go in and move into the corner where there'll be less noise. As I, or over certainly the last 5 years, as I speak to B2B brands and particularly technology brands about value and how they value themselves and how they understand reputation in the context of the different audiences they have. The role that analysts have in kind of shaping perceptions beyond the industry that they're in, beyond the the analyst community. In my conversations, it is increasingly important to technology businesses, to our clients. So on a fundamental level, I believe that analysts play an underappreciated role in the curation of brand communications and the creation of brand value. And so it's an honor and important for me to be in this forum, to be talking about this. In terms of
the types of information about an organization that analysts need and analysts use and analysts share, I think that speaks to two particularly important things. Firstly, is a fundamental kind of universal truism about how we as humans make decisions and what we find interesting about things. And you know, if brand marketing is about anything, it's about understanding the mechanics of persuasion and the mechanics of communication and turning those into a strategy and an approach to storytelling that are based on different audiences. So it doesn't surprise me at all that that there's a lot of kind of what I would call non-functional or brand-led information or brand-oriented information about an organization that it's really important for analysts to know and to communicate. The other part of that is the role that brand has in persuading buyers, right? And that's specifically what my research is about. I know in my bones, and I know now we have evidence to prove it, that technology buyers make final purchase decisions based on how influenced they are by their perception of a brand, much more so than they do about the efficacy or power or function of a technology. And you know, I think we've been going through a bit of a revolution over the last 10 years on how how B2B tech is bought and the buying journey of tech buyers. A lot more of it now is undertaken autonomously and themselves without engaging sales teams. And when they do engage sales teams, it's much later in the process. So that with that autonomy is a need for an organization to find a different prism through which to communicate to everybody, to all of their audiences, to customers, analysts, journalists, peers, and because of the proliferation of digital touch points, because there are lots of different fragments of a story to tell, a brand is the most influential and most persuasive vehicle for all of those stories. ESG and D&I are just two examples of the kind of stories that organizations need to tell about themselves, because lots of their external audiences are extremely interested, not just interested, there is a business imperative for them to know about an organization's commitment to diversity, inclusivity, and their ESG commitments and the promises they make to their suppliers. It is of increasing business importance for buyers of technology to know about that kind of thing to influence their purchase decision. We would call that non-functional information or brand information, because it isn't about the technology and the product or the technology product and service. So based on the fact that as humans we are interested in and make decisions about a range of different things, not just the most obvious logical product fit, and also because of the fact that a lot of the external audiences that the B2B tech businesses have undertake a lot of the gathering of information themselves, rather than ask to be given it by an account team or a relations team or customer team. Then it's important for businesses to communicate not just about their services and products, but about themselves as organizations, the softer factors. And the fact that analysts are part of that external community is critically important, but not a surprise to me, because of the role that analysts have always had in shaping perceptions of organizations.
Good. Okay. Well, so just to recap, one of the things that we found in our analyst relations practice is that often there's a bit of a tension between spokespeople who are really focused on speaking about the functional attributes, analysts who want to have conversations that are talking about functional and non-functional aspects. So talking about the market, talking about go-to-market, talking about employees, and so on. Yeah, ESG, which you've been mentioning, and and very often what we're finding in conversations is that spokespeople from vendors will come along with quite well prepared conversations about their solution and about the value that the solution unlocks. But they often will not have a very articulated conversation about those non-functional, those more corporate brand-oriented attributes. And so then, when we look at the makeup of briefings, what we're seeing is that 60% of the briefings now, the conversation is primarily focused on these brand attributes, on these contextual attributes, rather than on the offer. But what I'm going to do is, and then this chart from my colleague Chris Sedgwick tries to make sense of these numbers and makes the point that not just are these conversations pulling people in, pulling the vendors in different directions, pulling service providers in different directions, operators in different directions, but also it feels like analysts themselves are changing. Maybe these types have always been around, but what we're seeing is that analysts are increasingly more strategic, more future oriented, more focused on what differentiates the vendors from each other. Whereas in the past, if you think of like Magic Quadrants, Forrester Waves, these are devices that analysts have used to compare vendors, to compare their functionalities, and in a way they are increasingly comparable. Even if we just think of Magic Quadrants and where the dots are, it feels like a bit less of the space is being used. Vendors are more tightly clustered, perhaps, than they used to. The differentiators are less powerful in terms of execution and functionality, and the differentiators tend to be more in these more brand-oriented attributes. So what I think I'm going to do, Dan, what I've got is a list of questions that basically correspond with these key points in the research that you've been doing around brand, around sales, and around influence, and around power. I think probably rather than like leave this slide up for the rest of the conversation, what I might do is just like spotlight you and kind of talk through some of these comments from the research.
Yeah.
And of course, what I'll do always is like look for any questions that are coming into the Q&A and then respond to them. Some of the people here may have read your paper, others will not, in which case I'll also make sure to put a link to the research into the follow-up email that we send to allow people to respond to this. Hopefully we'll do something with the background noise from the beginning of the presentation. But just to stop sharing my screen, and just to allow your face to bigify and fill up the screen. Let me just start with the first one of these. I mean, the idea that a vendor's brand is as important, right? I mean, this may be something that is a little troublesome, a little hard for vendors to swallow, when so many people have this belief that, if they can build a better solution, then the world will be a path to their doorstep. And I think that's often taken for granted by many analyst relations people who are focused on that because of the way that Magic Quadrants and Forrester Waves focus us on critical capabilities, focus us on functionality. But then, as our analysis of the briefings has shown, actually that turns out not to be what they're interested in at all. That's kind of table stakes, isn't it? And not always the most meaningful way for them to be able to differentiate people.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and I think that there's a bit of a distance, bit of a gap between the purchase, the cognitive mechanics of purchase decisions for tech buyers, and the kind of information that analysts communicate, and that gap is understandable and is necessary, because analysts don't always share information and share insights that are purely geared towards purchase decisions. There's a much broader set of needs that analysts exist to deliver against. But the reality is that one angle on importance, one important component of understanding and unpacking importance is influence over purchase decision, particularly for our clients. And for a long time, products, technology, and services or solutions have been a door opener, have been table stakes. Technology fit will get you invited to an RFP, but it won't be the difference maker between one organization and a short list of three. And that kind of evidence, that kind of fact has been largely anecdotal for far too long. And I think that's because, particularly with B2B tech, there's a handover point between marketing and sales. And B2B marketing has been quite happy for that kind of handover point to be quite early in the buying journey. And obviously, traditional sales is around guarding and keeping and nurturing and relationship building. And so it's often been seen as a sale as the result of the skill of the sales individual, as much as it is about that person simply being a conduit of all of the kind of information that the buyer needs. As we've discussed, as buyer behaviors have evolved and much more of the buying journey has been undertaken autonomously, we can begin to prove that brand perception, so perceptions of an organization as an entity, rather than perceptions of its capabilities from a tech perspective or its kind of its relevance for to fit a particular tech need. Actually, the further down the purchase journey you go, and this research, we conducted this research specifically to give empirical evidence to this fact that has been anecdotally known for a long time. The further down the purchase journey you go, the less that tech buyers will talk or think about tech, will think about product, will think about capability or solutions. The nature of the internal conversations post RFP are much more around chemistry, almost. The right fit from an organizational level. It isn't a coincidence that across technology industries, the language of vendorship is moving towards the language of partnership, and that is for me another signpost that when tech buyers look for partners, they are looking for more than a solution fit and a product fit.
I think there are two kind of really intriguing things interposed there. I mean, one is actually this quite surprising notion, surprising for me initially, that brand perception is so important. Like through this buyer journey, there are different questions that people pose. Yeah? And the traditional model that we have, I think, has been like earlier on, you are looking at like, at technology needs and all the way through. But in fact, partly because people are gathering so much information from the people who they're speaking with, as soon as they don't collect information in individual silos, they are talking to people about their stories and their experiences. They're gathering information simultaneously about technologies and about brands all the way through. And this nature of the purchasing journey, I think, is also reflected in analysts who might be speaking to buyers all the way through the purchasing journey. So from the very beginning, analysts are involved in conversations about like what are the buyers like, what are their problems, what are their pain points, what are their experiences like. And this is like quite a big difference, I think, from conventional wisdom, isn't it? I think conventional wisdom very much is marketing investment should focus primarily on product. But the conversations that your researchers have found and the data that you've been able to pull back from all of these purchasing influencers actually changes that, right? I think you're really changing our perception of a customer purchase journey that is like highly rational, largely functional, in which customers have got business problems and they're looking for solutions to business problems. I think what you're finding is that purchasing process just isn't like that in reality.
No, you're absolutely right, and that goes back to that first point. And the reason for that is twofold. Firstly, that is not how we make decisions as humans. We are not, we do not have linear, rational, cognitive processes. Whether you subscribe to System 1 and System 2 thinking, or any other of the theories that describe the reasons why we make decisions, there isn't a description of human decision making that indicates that it's rational or linear. We will fixate on specific components of an entity based on preference, based on fear, and what we find interesting about an organization is likely to be much more than the obvious and much more than the rational. And that's just a fundamental truism. I don't want to kind of talk too much about the psychology of decision making, because the other side of that, the other reason why this is increasingly important, and that analysts need to be communicating more information than just product fit and product and solution, and certainly tech brands need to know that buyers expect more, is it is a natural consequence of the maturation of tech markets. When you have mature, established markets, what you almost always find is there is very little tech IP that separates whole clusters of organizations. And that is an unavoidable reality of the maturation of any market. And when you don't have giant gaps in tech IP, when you don't have really strong technology that differentiates every individual organization, and there are whole industries, very big, very healthy industries, where there is almost no differentiation in tech and tech stack and IP across dozens of competitors. And when you cannot rely on genuinely, provably distinct technology, then you have to rely on all of the other components that make up an organization and make up a solution to a need. And it is a consequence of a lot of convergence and maturation of tech markets. Now we have big clusters of organizations where there's very little IP between them. That, more than ever, that is a catalyst, or it should be a catalyst, to think, what non-functional assets do we have? What, over and above our products and solutions and our technology, what is it that we want all people to buy into? What is it that makes us uniquely placed to address the needs of our stakeholders? And I don't think enough organizations do it. I don't think there are strong enough brands, and that's why we're doing this research. But I think the analysts play such an important part in helping tech businesses realize that their brand is made up of all of these interesting soft assets from the coalescence of their expertise, their provenance, their spheres of influence in terms of their subject matter experts. Yes, their commitments to D&I and ESG, but the relationship they have with their suppliers, the relationship they have with the regions that they're in. There are several really important types of information that a tech business needs to communicate about itself that helps all of their external audiences, from analysts to customers and everything in between, to form an accurate perception. And it isn't just about awareness, and I can't reiterate that enough. Awareness is a blunt instrument. Perception is precise. Managing, harnessing, crafting, and curating perceptions by telling all of these stories 360 degrees of everything that makes up an organization. All of those need to be communicated. And analysts play such an important part of in that communication, but also encouraging tech businesses to think beyond the functional, because they are increasingly seen as gatekeepers of influence and gatekeepers of reputation.
And Dan, two things that really struck me about this. One is, in your research, you really are able to emphasize the way that tech buying has changed massively. Yeah? So of course, these trends have been unfolding for a long time. There was never there was never a moment where it didn't matter that IBM was IBM. Yeah, you know, brand attributes have always been significant, but I think your research shows like the dramatic acceleration of this over the pandemic, since the start of the pandemic, which I know is shown in your research and also in other research that other parts of CC Group have engaged in. The other thing that intrigues me is that I certainly see analysts like following this evolution in the buying center quite profoundly. Yeah, so you see like things like sustainability, diversity and inclusion being built into evaluation processes, being built into Magic Quadrants and Forrester Waves. So I think analysts are working incredibly quickly to ensure that their structured research methods are catching up with the different needs of analysts. The thing that's maybe surprised me the most from your research is that not just the people, not just the buyers focusing on brand attributes, but actually they have quite a clear idea of what a vendor's brand should be. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really satisfying, I have to say. You know, you embark on these any program of research with some hypotheses that you hope are ratified, but I think that the accusation of brand is that it has always been that it's a lazy accusation, but it is an accusation that it's kind of fluffy and it's a nice to have and it's not essential. I think that we can put to bed the argument that it doesn't influence decision making. It absolutely does, but beyond that. Buyers have a very, very clear idea about the types of information that any potential vendor or partner needs to communicate about itself. Now, as marketers, we've collected all that bits of information up and called it brand. And for the purpose of this conversation, we kind of dissected it as functional and non-functional. How the word you give to that cluster of information, that collection of different types of information is kind of academic. It's just that the brand is a useful word that gathers up all of the different types of information, brings it together, makes it accessible, and creates a platform for continuous communication about that. I believe that is what creates a brand, and our research showed that without fail, there were at least 10 different types of information that buyers expect a vendor or a partner or any kind of tech partner to communicate about themselves. And actually, when we asked them to prioritize those without any bias around product or service didn't feature in the top 3. In itself, that's an instructive answer, and I'm not going to give those away. Download the report; it's all in there. But we can talk about kind of the interesting additions to that list of information, and we can kind of talk about the obvious ones. Obviously, experience, experts, and as we've discussed before, kind of commitments to diversity, commitments to environment are clearly part of that kind of makeup of an organization. But there are other things like buyers expect technology businesses and vendors to communicate the breadth of their ethics, internal culture. They expect vendors to communicate the facets of their reputation. What is it that they think that they're known for? What is it that they think that people come to them for? It is reflective as much as it is about telling all of your best stories and arranging them all around. And obviously, this is about dissecting your organization into sector experience, attitudes, diversity, ESG policies, market position, reputation, culture, trustworthiness, prominence, ethics. Yes, you have to dissect that and populate that with stories, but it's more important to communicate all of that than it is to prioritize one or two or three of those, because there is simply, because of these expectations, there is simply a right and a wrong way to do this, and you're getting as close as you can to doing it right, and communicating in a way that buyers expect to communicate in a way that buyers want to be able to make a decision from, by doing all of it. And yeah, we have on slide 6 of the report, there's a full breakdown, and based on preference, what buyers expect vendors and partners to communicate about themselves. And yeah, it doesn't even start with product and service. It's, you know, it's a really interesting and really important. If there's only one thing that anyone takes away from the research, it's that there are 11 different components of 11 different stories to tell, and 11 different ways that a buyer will do due diligence about a tech business and about an organization. You have to communicate about all of those. You are absolutely, particularly in times of economic turbulence, or the perception of economic turbulence, it is a commercial imperative to be communicating about this. It's a commercial imperative to arm your brand with all of the content and all of the information about your business, to make sure your brand works, not just at driving awareness, but actually works through the funnel. And I'm unashamed when I talk about the role that the commercial impact the brand has. It is not a nice to have; it is a commercial imperative. And again, working together with analysts and understanding, from my perspective, understanding more about how to arm analysts with that, and how to arm analysts with the right questions to ask, means that importance is being echoed from a really critical part of the industry.
And let me momentarily just share my screens so that people can see those 11 items, because I don't want to stop people from downloading it, but I do think a couple of things kind of flow from these. Yeah, I hope you can see those points now. So one thing that struck me was when you spoke to people, only something like 2 in 5 said that that kind of functionality was to the fore when they were purchasing. Yeah, actually, for like 60%, 2/3 of the people in your survey, it was these other attributes that were either as important or more important. So I think one question that poses to me is, when you spend all of your time looking at marketing materials, right, from tech vendors. I mean, firstly, I wonder, how far do you feel that tech vendors are even touching on these, let alone giving enough effort to them? The other thing is, obviously, my team, or also you from time to time, will look at material from industry analysts. Yeah, how far are industry analysts well prepared? I mean, I know from, I'm working on a project at the moment where I'm doing a lot of qualitative interviews with analysts, asking them about what comes up in inquiry conversations, and actually, these are very often the things that they are speaking to me about. I mean, very often, especially in North America, diversity and inclusion is coming up very frequently in conversations with industry analysts. ESG has just exploded as a topic for people. But how well prepared do you think the vendors, solution providers, telecoms operators, how well prepared are people to engage in these conversations?
I don't think many are prepared in terms of communicating sufficiently and consistently on every point here. I think that there's an interesting nuance to this, or there's those organizations that seem to understand that quite naturally that they need to be communicating as much about ethics, attitudes, diversity, and culture as they do about products and technology, are those that are not kind of technology driven. And what I mean by that is there are, we work with seed funded organizations, we work with enterprise businesses. The the only real kind of correlation between those that are communicating about this kind of breadth of information and those that aren't are those that have never heroed their own technology, to the point that they are blinded by it. We work with a lot of organisations that know that they sit where they sit in their industry, that know that where their technology sits, and rather than try and force the perception that their technology is massively differentiated or is on its own solves a need. The brands that get this are those that understand that it is technology plus organisation together that creates this kind of powerful, compelling proposition. I've this instinct of mine that the brand is persuasive at the bottom, is the most persuasive thing at the bottom of the funnel for final purchase decision. It's something that I've really felt for a long time, because in my job I interview the buyers of our clients. I've done thousands of interviews in my career, thousands and thousands across technology, across life sciences, where I talk about what we call it customer needs research. It's qualitative depth interviews where we talk about the needs that that buyers have when they're in market, how they articulate those needs, and that articulation is so important. Not just what they need, but the language they use to describe those needs, how they prioritize needs. I've spent years and years and years, and every single conversation, they will say something along the lines of products and tech are table stakes, and nothing more. And the role that analysts have, and where analysts are in terms of communicating this, is linked to the fact that buyers expect more and are quite openly kind of communicating that now. Maybe 10 years ago, when I was doing this kind of research, a buyer would say, ultimately, if the tech isn't right, then there's no purchase incentive. Now that there will always be 3 or 4 expectations from a buyer, always, and product and solution can only ever be one of those. And I think that's that's the area that analysts can reinforce and can be thinking more broadly about communicating, is that clear, overt, and widely published link between what influences a buyer and how often that's communicated, or how readily that's communicated by a vendor. And I think that analysts are only, certainly in my experience, from a brand perspective, I now interview analysts as part of my brand research. That's something I've only really started doing the last 3 or 4 years. I will insist on interviewing customers, non-customers, journalists, and analysts, because without that, I don't have a full understanding of the reputation, and I don't have a full understanding of the perceptions of an organization and a category and a type of technology. And that's been driven by tech buyers. The bigger, particularly the big tech buyers and the big enterprise businesses that I work with, when they tell me how important analyst perception is to their own sense of self, that demands that I evolve my methods and I bring analyst perspective into it. But that also means that analysts need to be sharing and communicating that. If they're being brought in by organizations, and if they're being used by organizations to help shape brand perception, which they undoubtedly are, then the kind of information that the analysts communicate about an organization has to match these buying behaviors. And it's knowing that analysts are a critical part of how any organization crafts its reputation, how it extends its influence, and how it crafts its brand perception. And encouraging vendors and technology providers to communicate on all of these levels is simply analysts fulfilling their part of that dynamic.
That have come in from the chat. Well, one of them I think is hugely intriguing. I'm curious if you found. Well, I suppose what's interesting about this question is that it's a sign of the times. Are the functional and non-functional attributes dependent on whether it's a product firm or a services specific firm. And I think even that way of framing things is so intriguing because of the servitization of products. I mean, how many businesses that have products are actually selling products these days? You know, I'm thinking from telecommunications equipment vendors through to software vendors through to, I don't know, laptop manufacturers. I mean, so many things that were products are now services. And so even companies that are, you might think of as being product or platforms, actually are primarily service firms that are selling processes and people, and might be differentiating it on that rather than on tech. How do you see differences in the maturity of this brand story across different market segments, across different streams of our business?
It's a really good question, and I think there are two kind of ways to look at the question. A professional services firm, which is in the knowledge economy, right? And it usually doesn't sell products. Typically, it'll sell services. I think that the need for those kind of businesses that only sell services to communicate more broadly about their organization is every bit as keenly felt as those that traditionally telecoms, network infrastructure, what have you, that typically sell a technology or a product. The buyers that we spoke to, or that we are speaking to, are categorized within, and the report does categorize them within enterprise technology. So in almost all cases, they will be buying a combination of both products and services. For the point that you made, Duncan, I don't think I've worked with any organization for 10 years that doesn't at least sell a product but then reiterate internally, but we make our margin on the service. And so it's if the service isn't sold in with the product at onboarding stage, it will be the imperative for the upsell. And that's linked to the kind of maturation of tech markets. But I don't see a huge difference between the emphasis of this is the need to communicate lots of different types of information about your organization, tell a holistic story, and that need isn't really any different depending if you're selling widgets or if you're KPMG.
Are reflected, I mean, they reflect long-term trends, they reflect the pandemic, and then they reflect the current economic turbulence that we have. So another kind of intriguing question, in terms of economic downturn, shouldn't the focus turn to differentiation and how you are making a difference to customers rather than functional attributes? I mean, there is that long-term trend, but how is that changed by the downturn?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to avoid as much as possible being a bandwagoner in terms of there is a very clear link for me between the imperative, the importance of full brand communication and an economic downturn. If when in a context of more than ever needing your commercial kind of ducks in a row, you're missing an obvious trick. It's an own goal to not to be communicating like this. So I do think that it's always necessary. It's a business imperative in an economic downturn. It's simply giving yourself as much chance as you can to be as persuasive as you can and to be as influential and salient as you can. I think it's really important. I've avoided banging that drum too hard because they're being too kind of forthright about one thing when actually economic downturns are layered with complexity isn't always helpful to anybody. But I completely agree. Now more than ever, this is about not just communicating differentiation and distinction, but actually simply putting your best commercial foot forward.
ESG was one of the top 3 variables mentioned by your interviewees in the data. I'm certainly seeing this in so many ways with industry analysts. In the newsletters that we send out for clients, for example, I'm seeing so much more traction for webinars and content around ESG and more broadly actually around diversity as well. Just so much more engagement with content around these kind of broader environmental, more values-oriented questions for organizations. Is this, how much of a shift do you feel this is?
We had a conversation about a client internally not long ago that really kind of is a nice microcosm of the, you know, that is an important issue. We have a client who is an enterprise who is, we have a very good relationship with. We've done a lot of work for a long time, and this client intimated that it won't be long before their preferred supplier list, a decision between who does and doesn't belong on their preferred supplier list, will be made about whether they any suppliers can help them offset carbon footprint. Now, for instance, if as an organization that has a big carbon footprint, if they can bring on suppliers that are carbon negative, that is an offsetting of carbon footprint. Now, that is a hard business factor. That is ESG manifest, not as a virtue, and not as you know, kind of contemporary pandering to a current global conversation. That is a hard business reality that we are talking about. That it's very, very real, and that's just one of an almost infinite amount of examples of how ESG is beyond a topic of importance. It is a hard, tangible business factor that will, and that is just one example of how that will influence purchase decisions. And that, you know, that's a tiny microcosm of our organization and an enterprise that we work with. It's unimaginable the kind of refractions of other ways that ESG can play a hard, tangible, trackable, accountable role in decision making. I genuinely believe that ESG will become more concrete. It will become less conceptual, and it will become more real in terms of how it influences purchase decision, how it influences the way that tech buyers will organize RFPs, will shortlist potential partners, because it has very real, concrete business impact already.
And actually, on business impact, one thing that also struck me was that when you ask people about pricing, what impact do these brand attributes have on people's capacity to pay? You found that something like a quarter of participants would be prepared to pay much more based on these brand attributes, and 2/3 said that they would be able to pay something more on the basis of these brand attributes, which does kind of suggest that there's a strong business case for organizations that want to more seriously elaborate this kind of brand conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that the conversation I have with tech businesses, probably more than any other, when we talk about what influences your customers, and I do this internal research as well, and then I go out to customers as well, because the difference between what customers say influences them and what an organization say influences their customers is always different. But the answer to the question, what influences your customer most often, is cost. But a lot of vendors and tech businesses feel like their customers are cost sensitive. often that is because they are not investing in their brand, and therefore they are not differentiated enough. They're not communicating about enough, and so therefore, their addressable audience, their target customers, have only got cost to make a decision on. It's not because cost is particularly important. It's because it is the only thing you're giving them to base a decision on. So, the more rounded and accurate a brand perception is, the less price sensitive they are, the less cost sensitive they are, and therefore the more they're willing to pay. If you curate brand perception in the right way, you engender trust within a certain cohort of your target audience. This isn't about expecting everyone who could trust you to trust you. That's not how it works. But communicating on your own level about all of the things that we've discussed will engender trust in an important cohort of your target customers. And everybody is working towards building trust. It is critical for everybody, for every organization. And so the link between brand and trust is clear, and the link between brand and cost sensitivity is clear. So it was a very satisfying statistic to come out of that research, something that anecdotally or instinctively most marketers will feel, but the linear kind of journey from brand communications to trust to the evaporation of cost sensitivity, or at least the willingness to pay more, it's an important thing for us all to know. It's an important thing, particularly for tech businesses, to take back internally to try and win these arguments, because it's another hard factor.
I will just thank you so much. I'm going to make sure that we send out the recording and a link to the report to participants of the call. Obviously, you're available if people want to know more about how to explore this in their own organizations. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Duncan. Cheers all. Bye.